Good evening, everybody, and welcome to a new session from the Writing Room, Kitaba Room. Today, we are presenting our program, Writing Spaces, Masahat Kitabiyya in English, hosting two of prominent scholars and researchers in the field of coloniality, decoloniality, and human geography. Allow me to present this session with a few words to present the topic for everyone here. During the only 1 year of genocide against humanity, geography, urbanism, civility systems, and foundational institutions in Gaza, we learned to raise our voices, teaching the world about our Palestinian cause. We have urged them to see the truth, defending our narrative, and affirmed our historical rights to return to Palestine or our historical rights in Palestine, the right to get rid of this monstrous occupation and claim our return through different mediums. After only 1 year, we discovered that the concept of Palestine stored in our collective mindset through times, images, videos, grandmother's tales, and thinkers' narratives had completely changed. Thinking about and talking about Palestine today will not be effective unless we reread this scene and interpret it from a closer lens. The role of the intellectual demands that they move away from presenting intellectual surrender, defeatism, and create applicable spaces from this defeatist pessimism and describe and analyze present as it is without futile embellishments. So today, inshallah, we're going to examine a few questions. These questions might be rhetorical, like, is discussing the word Palestine connected with the word cause, قضية, matter, issue, conflict, صراع, or question, مسألة? How can we write about the Palestinian cause today when faced with a vast expanse of geography and imagined memory after a lot of sides created, side, urbanicide, and a lot? What remains of the genocide and ruins to claim the face of the city? Our cities, the origin cities, or a very live example like Gaza today. How can language be a partner in redrawing maps of resistance, decolonizing history and archives as we live and see them without distortion? And has the shock of this latest war of genocide on Gaza pushed us to the starting point of talking about Palestine? Please welcome with me with my guests for today, Professor Tahrir Hamdi and Dr. Abdalla Bayyari. May I introduce Professor Tahrir? Professor Tahrir is a professor of anti-colonial and resistance literature and president of Arab Open University, Jordan. Professor Hamdi recently won the International Palestine Book Award 2023 in the Countercurrent category for her book, Imagining Palestine, Cultures of Exile in National Identity. In 2020, she won the Abdul Hamid Shuman Foundation's Arab Researchers Award in the Humanities. She has also published research articles in reputable international journals such as Recent Class, Inventions, the International Journal of Postcolonial Studies, Journal of Postcolonial Writings, and Arab Studies Quarterly, which is a journal founded by Edward Said in 1979. She's an assistant editor with the journal Arab Studies Quarterly, also an associate editor in the new journal Janus Unbound. Moreover, she is on the editorial board of the Journal of Holy Land and Palestine Studies published by Edinburgh University Press. She has co-edited a new book on Ghassan Kanafani's political writings entitled Ghassan Kanafani Selected Political Works 2024, published by Pluto Press. Her research work revolves around resistance literature, anti-colonial theory, and the importance of place and space in literature. She published articles on Edward Said, William Butler Yeats, Mahmoud Darwish, Murid Barghouti, Saadi Youssef, Ghassan Kanafani, Najul Ali, Palestine, Ireland, and Iraq. Her current research interests include the complexities of space, historical, temporal, geographical, and imaginative within the anti-colonial and resistance spheres. Welcome, Professor Tahrir.
Thank you very much. I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you. And about our next guest, Dr. Abdalla Bayyari is a curator, a translator, academic, and independent researcher. He is a researcher at the for Palestine Studies and the Center for Palestine Studies, Brown University, and is an editorial board member of the Journal of Palestine Studies. He is a member of the Urban Affairs Association and the Geographical Association. He has served as a senior researcher for numerous Palestinian archiving programs and initiatives, including ACSS, ACRPS, and others. Bayyari has authored numerous academic papers in both Arabic and English that have been subjected to peer review. He's a lecturer at the Built Environment Institute for Applied Studies, Africa and Middle East in the decolonial and anti-colonial political geography course. Welcome, Dr. Abdalla.
أهلا وسهلا أهلا.
Thank you very much. And actually, talking about Palestine in Arabic is very, it puts us under a lot of pressure. How about talking about Palestine in English? But if we want to present and talk about the incorporated lines of writing and presenting Palestine, I want to start with the concept founded by Edward Said, which is the cultural resistance, because we are writing here today and we are presenting and analyzing. We're not, we don't have the privilege to resist on land. So, Professor Tahrir, how does cultural resistance contribute to redefining Palestinian identity within the border liberation struggle?
Thank you very much, Zainab. Also, I want to thank you for your introduction. That's very kind of you. You know, it's difficult to be simply talking about Palestine when we know that our brothers and sisters in Gaza and now the so-called West Bank are dying for Palestine. All we can do for now is talk, but this talk is, as you mentioned in your question, Zainab, very important because it is the job, I believe, of the intellectual, as Edward Said argued, of course, in his book, Representations of the Intellectual. It is the job of the intellectual to lay the ground, to lay the foundation for the culture of resistance. Now, why is the culture of resistance important? The culture of resistance is just as important as the armed struggle or armed resistance. In fact, I would say it's even more important because what does it do? We as intellectuals, as writers, as thinkers, need to define identity, nation, nationality, what it is we're fighting for, liberation, return, what these terms even mean, okay? Why is that important, Zainab? It's important because as intellectuals, we need to be able to construct a collective national identity. Armed struggle without a culture of resistance is an empty shell. It means nothing. And it may even lead to meaningless violence, okay? As we see and we've seen, let's say, in recent history and just like a few years back and even what we're witnessing today. Is it because when you think of liberation, my name, Tahrir, if you think of liberation, what does liberation mean if all it's going to lead to is chaos? Or to use the words of Condoleezza Rice back in the year 2006, creative chaos, okay? What does liberation mean when it would just lead to infighting, people of the same nation, of the same blood, of the same culture, of the same, on the same land, sharing so many things historically and for thousands of years? What does it mean? What would liberation mean if these people start killing each other based on meaningless things, really meaningless ideas and concepts that were planted by the colonizer? And I'm talking here about the idea of sectarianism. You're this, I'm that, okay? And we don't even call ourselves Muslims anymore. We call ourselves by our sects. So what I'm saying is, it is the job then of the intellectual to create an inclusive, collective, national identity, a strong national identity that would then lead to a successful armed struggle, and the armed struggle must be unified as well. That would then lead to liberation and return. Of course, that's the dream of every Palestinian, or most Palestinians, and I would say Arabs, not only Palestinians, but now even humanity. I see many people around the world, in their protests and their demonstrations, saying things like, in our thousands, in our millions, we are all Palestinians. What does that mean? They're not Palestinian by blood. They are Palestinian in affiliation, in humanity, in belonging to a just cause, or identifying with a just cause. So going back, that indeed is the importance of cultural resistance and building, constructing a solid, unified culture of resistance. Because without that, as I said, armed struggle, armed resistance would be nothing but an empty shell. I don't know if I made myself clear enough, but I hope I did.
And very simplest. Now we're talking, if I want to move from defining the Palestinian identity, Dr. Abdalla, to excluding the Palestinians from Space and Time Act as a form of cultural and geographical resistance against the colonial narrative that we are witnessing. I know that we are today talking about the Palestinian cause after a year of genocide, and everything that we've been through is unlearning of these concepts that we raise, like winning or triumphant flags. So, Dr. Abdullah.
Hi, Zainab. Thank you, Dr. Tahrir. Thank you for having me, Zainab. Thank you everyone for having the time to discuss while people are dying almost 30 kilometers away from us. I would like to start answering your question by picking what seems to be a very far away, quote unquote, starting point or point of departure, which is language. I do believe that most of us, even all of us, have experienced this sense of the failure of language. We cannot describe how painful it is what we are witnessing now in Palestine. So the very first word that we use when we are asked how are you, we say منيح, but it doesn't describe anything that even it failed even as a lie. It's not sufficient as a lie. We cannot say أنا منيح and that's it. No, it's not enough. So I do believe that since 2011 until now, we are witnessing an accumulated layers of failure of language. That those languages that are failing to describe what's happening right now include failure of political language, academic language, methodological, epistemic, political, whatsoever they are. That's why we need to think about returning, as Dr. Tahrir said, returning to a linguistic kind of home. So, in order to think about that, we need to think about what words can we describe what's happening now in Palestine. How would I describe to my 7 years old daughter what's happening in Palestine when she asks me every single night, "Why are you crying?" Me or her mother, "Why are you crying?" I need to find a language that can be a language that can have the capacity to describe what we are passing by. That will enlighten some parts, some aspects of the failure or the demand for a cultural cultures of resistance, as Dr. Tahrir said. We need to re-identify again, what does it mean, Palestine? What does it mean, Nakba? Nakba is a continuous, as I may quote from my dear friend Lias Khouri. It's a continuous. The Nakba is something that is ongoing, and it affects our language. It affects our, especially when we think about language as Palestinians. We need to know that we have been expelled out of space and time, which means that we are expelled also from language. That's why when we want to describe our language, what's happening to us, using languages that are quote unquote official, normative, performative in a way, we find it in a way cannot be fully descriptive and honest to what we are passing by. So we need to rethink about all the linguistic features that we are passing, or aspects of colonialism that we are passing by, especially when we are talking about space and time, because languages have its spatial and temporal aspects that we need to think about it deeply, especially in this moment of what's going on in Palestine.
Definitely, Dr. Abdalla, you moved to the active language. So if we want to combine the cultural resistance and decolonial of geography amidst what is happening now, and one of our attendees is from Gaza, and she's saying and amplifying that it is almost 500 days, not just a year. What kind of language that can accommodate the cultural resistance and also the geographical decoloniality? This question is for both of you. And I want also to ask for an elaboration that how you, as intellectuals who never stopped writing, defending, changing their language, act to all the audience, the readers, the people in the world who are no longer believing in these words anymore. Professor Tahrir, if you want, please.
Yeah, if I understood your question, Zainab, what kind of language should we be using? Definitely the language of decolonization, the language of, a clear language that does not, let me say, water down our ideas, because I find that many times what happens, even when we write, Zainab, like when I published, my book, Imagining Palestine, at the beginning, I used the word Zionist entity to talk about Israel. And then Okay, it was refereed, went to the reviewers, came back, great reviews. However, can she please say Israel? Okay, so I used Israel, then I put it in quotation marks, and then it went back, and then it came back. Can you please remove the scare quotes, the quotation marks? I used Israel in my book, but I was clear, as I told you, we can't water down our ideas. I don't know what page it's on, but I said something to the effect that my use of the word Israel does not bestow any kind of recognition or legitimacy upon this brutal Zionist settler colonial entity. So what kind of language do we use? We must use a decolonial language. And Zainab, one of the very most important things that we also need to do, and this is probably going to be my next project, that is decolonizing education, okay? Because we really can't do with writing what we want to do if our own education systems, not just in Jordan, but across the Arab world, all over the Arab world, and I would say the Islamic world, we have not yet reached the place where our universities, for example, are offering a decolonial curriculum. I'm going to take the example of the English language and literature department at any university in Jordan or the Arab world. Even other, world literatures or Arabic literature in translation is limited to one course. It is always marginalized. My question is the following: why are we even teaching English language and literature? Hold on, I know some people are not going to like my ideas here. Okay, why are we even teaching it? My question is, what are the aims? What are the aims of teaching English literature and going back to the 16th century and the 17th century and going through the 18th, 19th, 20th and taking England 1 and England 2 and England 3 and England 4 and learning about English culture and how democratic it is, etc.? Is it simply to learn the English language? Are we not aware that English literature departments were initially, when they first started and when they were first established in our countries, they were remnants of colonization? Are we not aware, as Gauri, the writer Gauri Viswanathan says in her book entitled Masks of Conquest, are we not aware that English literature departments were used in our countries, our nations, as masks of conquest? This was her, I think, PhD dissertation under the supervision of Edward Said, if I'm not mistaken. So in order to understand what kind of language we should be using, we need to be educating our young people in the proper manner. I am not against learning the literature of any people, but I'm just saying, instead of having, for example, an English language and literature department, why not have literatures in English department and study all of the world's literatures in English, if the aim is, for example, the English language? Literatures in English. Study the literatures of the Arab world in English, of Latin America in English, of China in English, of Britain in English, of the United States in English. What's wrong with that? It opens up the mind, and when you have clear objectives and aims, you know where you're going with your education and your young people. So language is tied to education, and our education must be tied to decolonization. We are under colonization, whether you like it or not, whether it's physical or mental, or we are all colonized. No Arab country is free in the sense of being able to make decisions, whether political or otherwise. No, none of the 22 Arab countries are free in that sense. So we need to decolonize, and decolonization must begin in our schools, at our universities, across the Arab world. It is a process. It does not happen overnight, but it's something that has to start. It has to begin. And tying all of this with my answer to your first question, this is the job of the intellectual. This is what we should be doing. This is what we must be doing. I'm going to start a revolution here, Zainab, so stop me.
والله يعني we'll march after you. طيب, Professor Tahrir, this is very important, and I wish really to get back to campus to practice this because, as you know, and I love when Dr. Abdalla always defines himself, I'm an independent researcher holding up his arms up, because he wanted to colonize himself from the institutional pressures on the way he is presenting his ideas. So in order to decolonize ourselves, Dr. Abdalla, I want you, because you mentioned something about the role of language, time, space, sound, and maps to counteract. How can we understand the Israeli or the Western apparatus and how it works within this kind of language? Because we cannot act unless we understand the source to fight and counteract, of course.
This is a huge question, I guess. طيب.
You put yourself in that.
طيب. Let me start with let's start with in every Israeli war on Gaza, there is a frequent picture of the surrounding settlers gathering all over top hills to watch the war over Gaza. This happened in 2008, 2009, 2014, 2021, and in this war. When we think about this scene, that those settlers get their couches, their popcorns, and snacks with their drinks, and they start watching. Even, by the way, in January this year, after 2 months of the war, there is a story for kids that was published by an Israeli father and a writer and a father, telling the story. The name of the story is Under the Glowing Sun, and on the cover there are the father and his 6 years daughter watching what is happening in Gaza, and the whole story is about why Israelis are doing that. They are saving the planet. They are eradicating beasts out of this world. So when we trace this scene historically, we would find that it's related to a very central scene in modernity, which is the Colosseum, or the Colosseum, the Roman amphitheater, where the emperor controls life and death, controls the meaning of what's happening there inside the Colosseum. This is a very, very central scene in colonial imagination, in a way that it is replicated in scenes like the Israelis watching from the borders of Gaza, watching the war. So when we think about where does it come, the idea or the concept or the essence of colonizing the other, it stems from How do we imagine the other? That's why what happened in Gaza, by the way, not only on October 7th, but for the whole 17 years ago, was really magnificent and eye-opening, that they totally decoded and deconstructed this whole architectural and spatial and geographical scene in a way that tunnels, for example, tunnels were, if we want to apply the idea of tunnels on the Colosseum, let's think about the individuals inside the Colosseum digging their tunnel and getting out the Colosseum to counteract the power of the Roman emperor. So it's about imagination. So how can we decolonize imagination? I would like to give you another example, which is the tunnels. Last year, in November last year, I was giving a lecture in Toronto University for architecture and design students. I asked them to imagine or try to think about a tunnel that you don't know its entrance or its exit, a tunnel that sustains life for endless number of people, a tunnel that cannot be exposed by satellites, a tunnel that can negotiate the whole world from an area that is considered to be not well developed, not its big prison. They failed simply because they cannot think about a tunnel without using their capitalist tools. Like, for example, even you and me, when we think about tunnels, we think about an area that will save me time to move from point A to point B, to save time, to transfer goods, and to save money, and to generate even capital. All those are firing back now over the capitalism represented by the Israelis. They cannot. That's why Netanyahu, when he was after he gave his fake speech in the American Congress, he said that the war is not only in Gaza; it's also on the academic domain, because this is important. This is why Dr. Tahrir said that without cultures of resistance, there will be no liberation, because you need to decode this, to counteract this. بيسموها بالعربي يتذوت الاحتلال، انه يفوتوا جواته، انه to think about colonization as I am colonizing myself when I'm thinking, when I'm expressing, when I'm talking about anything.
To identify maybe with the colonial mindset.
Yeah.
أو يتماهى معها. Definitely. In this framework, so we talked about the cultural resistance, and we moved to this geographical decoloniality, and we talked about what the role of the intellectual. Now, you can now also start a revolution process, Tahrir, how we can foster the decolonial mindset of the intellectual within the resistance framework. This is a personal question for you, maybe to present how you reacted and how you as intellectuals foster that and deviate from the traditional and conventional readings of the scene and what's happening.
Okay, thank you, Zainab, for that question. In terms of the intellectual, I've read what many thinkers have said about the intellectual. Of course, in Ghassan Kanafani, الأديب المقاتل, the fighting writer or thinker. The same for Frantz Fanon, the fighting writer who creates a fighting literature. For Edward Said, the intellectual always positions himself, herself on the margin, never in the hegemonic center. and this is a very important point. Bell Hooks, the Black American writer and critic, has a very important essay on that. The title of her essay, Choosing the Margin, a space of radical openness. Now, why the margin? And who is the intellectual? For example, for Edward Said, the intellectual is not the person who lives in her ivory tower, elite ivory tower, specialized in 17th century English literature. That is not an intellectual. An intellectual is a learned, educated human being who positions himself, herself on the margin. Why the margin? Because the margin is the space of the oppressed, of the marginalized, of the refugee camps. Okay? So this is where the intellectual belongs. He, she must represent and speak on behalf of the oppressed. How did I find myself here? How did I distance myself, let's say, from the traditional? We studied English literature, so we studied, of course, Shakespeare and Charles Dickens and Emily Bronte and, all the things that you study. But to be honest, as a thinker and someone interested in literature, I could never understand how I was supposed to focus on things, on concepts, on writers, on issues that didn't really move me or move my very being, my cells, my blood, okay? I could not ignore, for example, now we have a genocide, okay, going on. Can you imagine ignoring a genocide and focusing on something else as if this genocide or Holocaust did not exist? Is that what it means to be an intellectual? As soon as I graduated or finished my BA, MA, PhD, all I could think of, to write about is Palestine, because that's the issue for me. That's what I grew up with. These are the stories I heard from my parents. Maybe this is what Marianne Hirsch would call post memory, okay? But I was named Tahrir for a reason. My dad was my father, Khalil Hamdi, was one of the founders of the Arab nationalist movement in the 1950s in Amman, okay? And he always went to Lebanon, to Beirut, to meet with other people who were involved in the Palestinian cause. So this was the environment that I was brought up in. But I think that you don't have to actually live on the margin to be able to speak for those who are oppressed. As Edward Said emphasizes, it is a metaphorical margin. This feeling of being unsettled, of being not comfortable, uncomfortable. This is something that we need to carry along with us. Why? Because as long as there is oppression in this world, and Palestine is the best example of that in this world, in our day and age, then that's the issue. That's the cause. That's the thing that should concern you, that should concern me, and should concern the intellectual living in Sweden and Ireland and the United States. You don't have to be an Arab to know that what is happening in Palestine a genocide, a Holocaust. There was an interesting conversation. I forget now. It was between maybe Candace Owens and what's that British guy that keeps asking, do you condemn, what's his name? Piers Morgan. Yeah, she was calling it a Holocaust, and he was saying, no, it's not a Holocaust. She says, why isn't it a Holocaust? He says, because not all 2.3 million of the Gazan people in Gaza have died and have been killed yet. So is it awaiting for all 2.5 million people to be killed for us to wake up? Okay, this is inhuman. And it is inhuman and a betrayal, I think, of any intellectual who is not concerned or can find other things to talk about, can admire the rose while there's a genocide going on. Okay, it's not about being Palestinian, it's about being a human being. So for me, it was always part of my life, and I say it in the acknowledgments section of this book. I carry Palestine with me wherever I go. So of course being Palestinian had something to do with it, because I learned about Palestine at a very early age, unlike other people. But I truly believe, to be a human being, to be a true intellectual, in the intellectual Saidian, I'm using Said's ideas, sense of the word, you must affiliate with the oppressed in this world, wherever these people exist. And Palestine is happening now. Everybody should care. Everybody should speak and talk and write and protest and discuss and teach Palestine.
Thank you, Professor. And I encourage everyone, I will drop the link for Imagining Palestine, Professor Tahrir's book, and it is very elite and amazing. You will enjoy the introduction. And I found it very away from the academic apparatus, because you're telling your story and you are talking as you are talking now. So it is very accessible, and it is also a very deep journey from a Palestinian talking about Palestine and highlighting all these Palestinian figures, whether in theory or in literature, in a very deep and profound way. Dr. Abdalla, the same question goes also to you. Among this genocide, as an intellectual, you published a lot of articles. You were concerned also, not in writing, but also in movie making. You used as much as media that you can engage with to amplify your voice and your feelings. We kept being apologetic for not engaging with people, all of us, but you were also behind the scene, were working. Even if you're not in contact with us directly, we were seeing your production. So I will move a little bit to the production of colonized geographies through your work. And I know that recently the whole world, the Arab world, lost a very prominent author, thinker, Ilyas Khouri. And it is also a friend and a colleague of you. So please deliver this experience to us and tell us more about it.
I would like to delve a little bit beyond what Dr. Tahrir said about borders in order to think about your question. First, when we admit a border as a border, we admit to the powers that identified border as a border. So it's not only about situating yourself on the periphery or the border or what. By the way, it has lots of different terminologies: borders, peripheries. All those, each one of those come with different theoretical and huge package that does not think about us from this part of the world. Take, for example, I would like to refer to Catherine McKittrick. Catherine McKittrick is a Black feminist geographer in Canada. She is a woman of color. She said once that colonization always deprived the indigenous people from their their geographical sense of identification. So let's think about one aspect of such geographical sense. Let's think about the word intifada. Intifada now is identified as a political term, and you would find it written intifada, INTIFDA. Simply, that wouldn't be reachable without dismantling the power dynamics in political theory in a way that made the whole Western mentality get a little bit confused. What's happening there? So, in order to produce your own emancipatory language, you need to dismantle this power dynamics in a way. Like, take another example, the word genocide that we keep using. I would refer actually to the word herbicide, which is I'm working on and has published a couple of papers about it. The word herbicide, when you found it, herbicide is the killing of a city. When you search for the history of this word, you would find it related to Sarajevo, and related to the what's so-called American City in Jane Jacobs' prominent book about the life and death of American cities. You would find it related to Marshall Berman on also American cities. You would find it related to Al-Mosul in political context during ISIS, the war between U.S. and its allies with ISIS. But you wouldn't find it related to Baghdad, what happened there. You wouldn't find it related to what's happening now in Gaza. So when you use those words and terminologies, they are brought to your mental tool and theoretical tool with their own affiliations. So and their own biases in a way that they will defect your lens of analysis. So we need to think about language in a way that we start as if we are starting language from the early beginning. Like, for example, when we pushed Intifada, when we pushed Sumud, when we pushed Al-Haki as a way. How can we do that? It's not only related to intellectuals. I would bring a very exciting example. Do you remember in 2021 when the 6 political prisoners escaped, Palestinian escaped Al-Jalboua maximum security in northern Palestine? When they were divided into 3 groups, each group of 2 individuals. When they after they were caught, an Israeli reporter asked one of those, and how did you manage to do that? He answered him in a way that I do believe that this moment was a moment of very anti-colonial knowledge production. Not only decolonial, it's also anti-colonial. He said, I ate a wonderful cactus fruit, اللي هو الصبر. Okay. By the way, the Israeli reporter, he stood like this with this gloomy face. إنه شو بتحكي؟ يعني what are you talking about? I'm not talking about what you ate during this 3 weeks escapage. طيب. What's so unique? Palestinian. Now let's redirect the question in a Palestinian way. We know that in Palestinian oral history, there is a huge and a very multi-layered knowledge about the sabr. And whenever you find a cactus, there was a Palestinian refugee passed from here, or a Palestinian village that was covered by cactus. So يعني انا بتذكر سيدي كان دائما يحكي لي وين ما بتلاقي صبر بتعرف انه في فلسطيني مرق من هون. ف when he said I ate it, eating fruit is the vertical relationship with the land, while passing as a refugee is the horizontal one. Israelis and colonialism wants us as indigenous to be always moving horizontally with no vertical traces. You don't. They take our vertical relationship with food, like for example with hummus, with falafel, with all those vertical relationship with land are taken from us as Palestinians. So this is a way that this kind of knowledge decolonize oral history and anti-colonize architecture in a way. So now we in Palestine have something called liberation agriculture. In order to achieve that moment, you don't need the capitalist production of an intellectual. You can be. I do believe that my grandfather, who went to school for the fourth grade, is more emancipatory when it comes to knowledge about Palestine or architecture in Palestine, other than my younger brother who has a master's degree. Why? Because this production of intellectual and knowledge can be achieved by regular people. You don't have to be Frantz Fanon, but you need to read it. You need to be open to different kinds of knowledge. I hope I made myself clear in that point.
I mean, these are very enlightening examples, of course, about the horizontal and the paradigmic and linear mindset of how the colonials wants us to be and see. Now, you mentioned a lot of the terminology that we are inserting in our daily language, even if we're using English like sumud, steadfastness, or intifada, and we're talking nakba and naksa. And even now, cities in Gaza are referred to with their Arabic name, with people who are using language other than the Arabic. Also, there are calls on the other side of ourselves. It becomes very to come out inside out, which is the defeatism. Okay, this speech of defeatism. How can we as intellectuals, people who wants to speak up, to write, to contribute, fight this defeatism? Professor Tahrir.
Thank you again, Zainab. You know I love that question.
Yes.
Some people, when they ask me, what is your book about? Imagining Palestine. If I were to summarize it very briefly, it would be about anti-defeatist thinking, okay, which leads to, action, agency. What is defeatism, okay, and what does it mean to be defeated? First of all, for me, defeatist thinking is to accept the current status quo, okay? To accept how things are. To say things like, you can't do this. Palestine cannot be liberated. Don't you know how strong Israel is, and behind it, the United States and the whole West and Arab regimes? For me, that is defeatist thinking, okay? Israel, the Zionist entity, can and will be defeated. You know why? Because Israel represents an entity that can only exist by exterminating and expelling a population. That's how it was established, and that's how it continues to exist. Extermination, genocide, and expulsion. That cannot, this kind of, can I use a little bit of like philosophical language? Theodore Adorno, okay? That is what Theodore Adorno calls the consummate negativity, okay? What is the consummate negativity within the context that I'm speaking about? The consummate negativity is extreme oppression. It is extreme, I mean, when you think of being able to exist only on expulsion and genocide of another people, of a human race, okay? So that cannot continue to exist. As Theodore Adorno says, when he talks about the consummate negativity, let me see if I can find it very quickly, because I don't want to waste your time. And if I don't find it, I'll just, yes, I found it. Okay, I say here that Theodore Adorno's concept of the consummate negativity, when I'm applying it, of course, to the Palestinian situation, whereby the reality of the brutal Israeli occupation and the colonization of Palestine in its extreme negativity can only, by necessity, give rise to, and I'm going to quote Adorno again, Patrick Williams, further imagining. Williams, quoting Adorno, writes that this consummate negativity, once squarely faced, delineates the mirror image of its opposites. And what is the mirror image or of the opposite of the consummate negativity? It is an extreme form of defiance and sumud, what I call Palestinian sumud. Example, Gaza. What do you see happening in everything? I mean, we were talking about destruction, herbicide, genocide, ethnocide, all kinds of also epistemicide, all kinds of pure destruction. But what do you see happening in Gaza now? Have the people surrendered? No. They continue to try to live, to eat, to laugh, to play, and the armed resistance continues its resistance. I mean, and what do you see? And you have, this has been going on for a year and a half now, daily. They have not surrendered. So if they don't surrender, and if they are anti-defeatist, if you who are living in, pure luxury compared to that, if you hold on to this kind of defeatist mentality, you're a traitor. And this is a betrayal. A betrayal of what? Not only a betrayal of Palestine and Palestinians, it's a betrayal of humanity. So the idea of defeat, also to accept, what is defeatism? Not only to accept the status quo, but also to accept the thinking of the colonizer. And what do I mean about that? By that, the colonizer has a program, has a plan. Condoleezza Rice in the year 2006 called it creative chaos. I know you all have heard of divide and conquer, and we know that's how colonization works. You divide them, you conquer them, you kill them, you make them fight each other. Now, when we apply that on the ground and we start looking and emphasizing our divisions, we are going along with the colonialist agenda, and that is defeatist. That is pure defeatism and pure betrayal. So what is imagining Palestine about? It's about being able to imagine a future liberation, a genuine liberation, a genuine unity. It's an anticipatory discourse. It is anticipating the outlines of a better world, okay? So it is based on the principle of hope. What is the opposite of defeat? Hope. Hope in what? Hope in what? Hope that there will indeed be a future liberation. But we need to be able to speak to minds in this way and to try to make people in our young generations understand that, okay, struggle, resistance, it's multi-generational. It may not be in my lifetime, in our lifetime, but it will continue. Where there is oppression, there will always be resistance. And the oppression is strong and it's deep. But the resistance is going to be not only just as strong, but stronger than that kind of oppression, which must end, okay, and will end. So these are some ideas on defeat and defeatism, yeah, Zainab.
Yes, Professor, very great. And that also triggers a question. I will put it for later. And I believe that it has been raised recently about أسطرة الشعب الفلسطيني and who accepts that and how can we highlight it more. But we will take it and put it for later because we want to open it up between you and Abdalla. So Abdalla, Professor Tahrir mentioned the defeatism of the mentality, the mindset, and our thinking. I want you to elaborate on the defeatism, on the geography of the indigenous people. Now, Gaza is no longer, because it is a live example, it is no longer the Gaza we know. And even we have never known Gaza before this war as its people knew it. With all these photographs put in memory, the reels via social media, the videos, the shared moments, the people, we are away from all those things unless we're documented. So how these geographies are produced now within this colonial sphere, especially with the Israelis' intentions toward these destructions? And I would love to quote a word from one of your articles. I love the use of the word, but I don't of course love the effect, which is al-kharaib.
Okay. طيب. In 2000, during second Intifada, there was a settlement that was built upon the ruins, quote unquote, of a Palestinian village. The settlement is called Kfar Shalem. It's to southern east of Jaffa. It was built on the ruins and the remaining structures of a Palestinian village called As-Salama. In 2000, during the peak of the second Intifada, the settlers got angry in a way that they want to express their sense of as Israelis, the sense of confrontation and despair in a way they want to symbolically express it. So they decided to go armed with hammers, shovels, whatever they put their hands on, to destroy the remaining structure of As-Salame Mosque, which was يعني almost destroyed, but yet there was a remaining structure اللي احنا بنسميها خرائب أو أطلال. I would like to use خرائب أكثر من أطلال, because أطلال gives you in Arabic this sense of temporal separation, while in Palestinian case it's not separated in a way that the colonial modernity's discourse would like to put it. Anyway, they decided to finish the job and totally demolish it. Israel and the municipality sent a security force to protect the remaining structure. For me, as a Palestinian, this is a very complicated scene in a way that cannot be explained. Why to protect my abandoned remaining structure of a mosque that you, from the first place, you destroyed it and you evacuated and killed 90 or the majority of the people of that village? Why to protect it now? So one way to decolonize this kind of perspective is to stop believing in the binary thinking of white and black, right and left, mind and soul, mind and heart. All this kind of modern duality and binary, it keeps colonizing us in a way that it is implanted in our way of thinking. Let's take another example. And I would argue, and this paper will be published by Duke University. It was published in Arabic first, and it's gonna be published in English soon from Duke University. Israel uses such geographical landmarks to generate a historical narrative that they are here from history in a way that those Palestinians are encapsulated with the temporal cage of being pre-modern. Another example, and this example I would like to bring it because I do believe it is it's the Palestinian philosophical participation in human knowledge. I think in April, when I don't remember his family name, but his first name was Saad. This famous picture of the Palestinian fighter who was jumping out of joy, saying "Wallat, wallat," talking about an Israeli tank. I'm thinking about this moment of joy as a philosophical contribution to human knowledge in a anti-colonial way. Think about that. I am the Palestinian freedom fighter, Hamas or Al-Jihad al-Islami, holding a bazooka made by maximum $250 and targeting a $50 million Israeli tank. If I went to the moment of I think therefore I am, I would think I would not hit it. I would not be victorious by any way. So we need to decolonize أنا أفكر إذا أنا موجود. هاي المقولة, this founding claim. This is a moment of colonization that we need to decolonize, simply because we don't think without biases. Thinking as a linguistic tool comes with its biases in a way that the moment I think, it means that I'm affiliated with this kind of thinking. So, how to think? By using this kind of different power dynamics, different and anti-colonial rearrangement of the whole relationships in the colonial apparatus. that makes the 6 political prisoners who escape conquerors and victorious, simply because they decided to produce another cartography of the Palestinian geography in a way that Israel spent 3 weeks and 4 weeks without knowing where are they, because regardless of how much modern technology and satellites they use, same as in Gaza. Why? Because this kind of knowledge is very anti-modern, anti-colonial, but not in a negative way, but in a confrontational way.
I want now to move a little bit like backward to the intellectuals who put in their books Palestine and how Palestine is narrated through their books. And I think there is no any poetry, novels. Of course, they document all of these thoughts, but there is nothing more than memoir of an intellectual that brought Palestine into narration and into action. هلا you will say طبعا احنا هلا this is a space for agreeing and disagreeing, but I want just to highlight, and then you can elaborate on that. We might discuss, Professor Tahrir, the chapter in your book, writing Palestine narrated in the memoirs, especially Out of Place, Edward Said on Murid al-Barghouthis. And Dr. Abdalla, you might elaborate on I Saw Ramallah by Murid al-Barghouthis as well, within the literary paradigm, because these are the authors that we refer to when they visit Palestine, their visitations, their experiences. Is it the same as we today feeling the return to Palestine or the visitations? Professor Tahrir.
You're asking about for example, the experience of return in Murid Barghouthi?
No, I'm asking about the Palestine narration in the memoirs, as you mentioned in your book.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll get to memoirs and the importance of the memoir in a little while.
Yeah.
But I wanted to jump to something else, because you're talking about poetry about Palestine, and that there's not, it's true that there's not a lot out there in terms of narration and poetry. There is some, especially by Palestinian American and Palestinian British writers like Susan Abu Hawa, for example. She has like 3 novels, or 3 or 4, I think. But she's also very active in terms of politically making her views very well known, especially nowadays. But I also found, for instance, when I was writing my book, that there was, in fact, a lot of let me call them marginalized groups who wrote about Palestine. And it was interesting how and why they affiliated with Palestine. One of them was the Black poet, passed away now. Her name is June Jordan. And one of her poems is called Moving Toward Home. And it was based on, she wrote the poem after she visited Beirut, Zainab, in the year 1982. This is right after the Sabra and Shatila massacres. She actually was one of the very first people on the ground there. And she was viewing this, the scene of the massacre and embryos being torn out of the wombs of their mothers, etc. So one of the poems, she wrote several on Palestine and the Palestinian experience. One of them was Moving Towards Home. One poem is called Moving Towards Home. And I really like the last part of that poem, Zainab, where she says, I was born a Black woman, and now I am become a Palestinian. Notice the grammar mistake is intentional, not I have become, but I am become. Why? Because this is a becoming, ing, in progress, okay? I was born a Black woman, and now I am become a Palestinian. Against the relentless laughter of evil, there is less and less living room. Notice the word living room, as in غرفة الضيوف, and living room, space to live. So you have a double meaning there. There is less and less living room. And where are my loved ones? It is time to make our way home. Very powerful words, but it is based on experience, and from that, a lived experience, because she was there, she saw. From that, I'll move on to the idea of memoir. One of my chapters, as you mentioned, is on the memoir, Edward Said's Out of Place, okay? And Murid Barghouti's, of course, I saw Ramallah, and I was born there. I was born here. Okay, Murid, you know, Zainab is interesting. He once came to our house. I called him. That's, of course, before he passed away, in the year 2016. I said, I'd love to interview you. Should I visit you, or would you like to? No, I just said, can I come to your house to have the interview? He said, no, I'll come to yours. And he did. But what struck me about Murid was he was very polite, very nice, very handsome. He drove his own car. He got out, came in. He said, I couldn't find the flower shop to get you some flowers. I'm sorry. He apologized. Then he looked around the room. Space was a very important thing for him. Space. He looked around the room and he said, I want to sit there. Okay. So he chose the space that he wanted, where he wanted to sit. When he sat down, I said, would you like to have some coffee? He said, yes, but make it, and he used the word in Arabic. I'm going to say it in Arabic. Make it بدي إياها علقم. Alqam. He wants it bitter, bitter. And if you read my book, Zainab, the idea and the concept and the meaning of bitter for me is very important, because you have the bitter Palestinian experience. It's a lived experience. My brother, you know, I know I'm going left, right, and center, but please bear with me. My brother, Allah yarhamo, his name was Hamdi Khalil Hamdi. He was a scientist, okay? He had a PhD in biochemistry. So his job was to make drugs, to make medicine. But Palestine, as I told you, lived within us. So he went to like Palestinian culture, Palestinian history, and geography. He was very interested in the olive tree, Zainab. And he said, I want to see, because as a scientist, he noticed that the leaves of the olive tree don't seem to be disturbed by the elements of nature. So he said, I want to see what's inside that, the leaf of the olive tree. He did. He examined the compound inside the leaf. It's called alloprian. It's a very bitter compound. And Zainab, it cures cancer. He's a scientist. He tested it, not only in the laboratory, but on people. But it's and he always told me this, it's the bitter principle, Tahrir, the bitter principle. It's the bitterness in it that makes it work. Now, what I want to say and how I tie that to memoir, memoir is lived experience. It is like when Murid Barghouti tells his story, when Edward Said tells his story. Yes, they are personal stories, but at the same time, they are national stories, okay? Now, when I was writing Imagining Palestine, it's supposed to be an academic book. You know how academic books are. Very like professional, you don't get personal anywhere. But when I was writing it, I'm like, but I do have a personal story to tell. I need to talk about my dad, who was one of the founders of the Arab nationalist movement. I need to mention my brother Hamdi, the scientist who rooted his science in the very culture of Palestine. So the personal, Zainab, the personal in the Palestinian context, in the Palestinian case situation, is also the national. It is our lived experience. So memoir in the Palestinian context, I would say, is essential. We all need to tell our stories. So that's why I included personal elements in the academic. And I remember that one of the referees said, it's very strange that in an academic book, the writer or the author includes some personal stories, like almost memoir. But you know, it works really well. And I really do believe that the two go together. And you know, one question I asked Murid when I was interviewing him, I said, why did you call it I saw Ramallah? He said, let me tell you why. I saw Ramallah. I did not return to Ramallah. I did not return to Ramallah because return is a collective endeavor. When we talk about return, we talk about the return of the millions of Palestinians. All of the refugees of Palestine will return to Ramallah. It's a collective endeavor, okay? So I was going to say something, then I forgot it. But yeah, this is the idea of return being collective. I wanted to connect the collective return to Palestine to something from Ghassan Kanafani's Returning to Haifa, when he said, one of the characters in his novella said, yeah, you know what, when they went to Haifa and they saw, no, okay, it was very sentimental and emotional. When we return, a real return, that requires a war. That's what Kanafani's character in the novella said. So a return requires a genuine liberation and revolution. And I messed things up, I know, but that's what you get. That's what you get.
It is very similar to our Palestinian narrative, Professor Tahrir. You are igniting in us, and also you're pulling the trigger for us to write our stories and memoir. We don't know. Yesterday we had a session and we said something about writing our memoirs and stories, and we don't know how courageous, how really steadfast to tell the story and know that a lot of people are reading it. A lot of stories of return. Abdalla, we'll get back to your facial expressions when we said that memoir might be the most important thing. But let's jump from Professor Tahrir points about these memoirs are not only personal, but also national. I would love to hear your insights about I saw Ramallah as well, and your counteract to my question as well.
Okay, thanks. Let me tell you something first. I've been working on Palestinian archiving projects, $1 million funded projects, and we are reaching 0 point, even after those years, simply because we need to decolonize the way we archive Palestine. When we have to admit something, that when we write something, we erase another thing. So writing memoirs, erasing others. So when we think about collective returning, if we had this wild imagination that that Israel collapsed overnight, and we can all Palestinians, we can all return. Same. Where would we return to? Yani cities and spaces and places are are entities that grow up, that change. I do remember a very good friend of mine who kept saying that Palestine is very beautiful from outside, but when you get inside, this is. I think that returning is an ongoing, such as Nakba is an ongoing process. Returning is an ongoing process. We cannot return to point zero. That's I get it from, I don't know if you know it, Hussein al-Barghouthi. He also has a very wonderful memoir, which is يعني a very masterpiece. الضوء الأزرق بالنسبة لي, it's my, people used to say it's my Bible. For me, it's my Quran, if I would say. بيحكي, راح أقرأها بالعربي لأنه مكتوبة بالعربي. بيحكي: تخيلي أن مقاتلي منظمة التحرير الفلسطينية بعد إخراجهم من بيروت بالسفن في 82 رجعوا لأصلهم البحر، وعندما وصلت سفنهم إلى كريت أنزلهم الكريتيون إلى الشاطئ وأقاموا لهم الولائم والليالي الساهرة وقالوا أنتم أبناؤنا الضالون. قالت: مشكلة السود مختلفة. هو كان بيحكي مع, he was talking to a black or a woman of color. She said: مشكلة السود مختلفة. إن حاولنا الرجوع إلى بداياتنا في أمريكا نرجع إلى العبودية في مزارع القطن، ولا يمكن بناء هوية أساسها أن أكون عبدا في نظر نفسي وغيري. So, كمان, when we identify a returning point or a point to return, we need to know what is that point. This identification is a production, is a way to produce this whole journey. I went to Palestine I was in Jaffa, my home country, in 2015. I was amazed. I wrote something about that. It was published in Palestine Studies Journal. It's about the violent, how colors are violent. Sorry. Yani, we hold this huge story of memory that Palestine is black and white. When I went there, the sea was very blue, voices are very loud, language are very expressive, trees are very green, in a way that it kept infiltrating my body, and I felt that I don't have the right to color the city. I don't have the right to imagine the story in colors. While my wife from there, she has this very regular relationship with the blue color, the green color. I couldn't stay there for more than a week. It was very infiltrating. Why? Where would I return? I hold a black and white. So when we think about, thinking about getting back to memoirs and the sea that was Hussein al-Barghouthi pointing at, do we know that Mediterranean in Palestinian history has a very colonial history, in a way that we need, that some villages south to Jaffa were built with no windows facing the sea, simply because they kept imagining the sea as a way to colonization come from Jewish immigrants, and Jewish agency came through. So we need to be more critical when it comes to memoirs, especially because it's not about memoirs for itself. It's about how we curate knowledge out of those memoirs. This archiving project I used to work in publish yearly almost 25 memoirs. But let's think about, where is Palestine in those memoirs? And this is, by the way, this is the wonderful lesson we get from Gaza. All fighters in Gaza and freedom fighters and the people, we don't know faces and names. We know that this fighter exploded a tank. This fighter made accessible to Jabalia, made the way to Jabalia accessible, but we don't know their names. This is a new era of thinking about Palestinian history, regardless of who the one is, but about general knowledge that counteract that modern archiving methodologies. أتمنى أكون جاوبت سؤالك.
It's not about like answering my questions, Abdullah. It's more about opening these discussions. Even if we leave this session with open-ended answers for questions for the audience who are watching, and also the ones who will be watching this YouTube recording later, we don't want to give them answers. We want them to rethink, to unlearn, and also think more about how much they are anti-colonial, or they are decolonizing even their daily routines and thinking. And I want here to move on. Professor Tahrir, you mentioned that amazing poem by Jordan, when she said, "I've become." What does it mean to become a Palestinian? How can we really trust our hunch that we are really Palestinians, especially today? A personal question that I am raising. Since 1948, there was the Palestinian catastrophe, a Nakba, and I am a granddaughter of that Nakba. And my husband and our families are also the production of Naksa, 1967. My family, my grandparents lived in refugee camps in Jordan, Zarqa, and a lot of people from Palestine were also depossessed and expelled into other areas in Palestine. A lot of people from Gaza, they are originally from decolonized inside of Palestine and also in the West Bank, and we are all mixed up, some in the diaspora, some in the exile. So when we say becoming Palestinian, I always think about all those divisions, all those mindsets, differences, how we preview Palestine from the inside and how we dream about Palestine from the outside, how to become Palestinian.
Okay, thank you very much, Zainab, once again. When I use the term becoming, it's actually a term that entails construction, a kind of constructing, a work in progress. Now, why becoming? Like what Jordan, the last part of the poem that I read, I am become a Palestinian. It is, even as I said, the grammar mistake is intentional to give the idea of continuation, of progression. Because becoming Palestinian, for me, is a revolutionary becoming, okay? It is as I said, a work in progress. Change is happening within the person. Maybe the best way I can explain it is to use the concepts used by Edward Said, filiation and affiliation, okay? Whereas filiation, of course, as you know, it depends on the family you come from, your blood, your name, your tribe, your etc. Okay, you are born with it. It's given to you. You don't do anything about it. You're just born this way. Whereas affiliation is something different. It is a kind of becoming. When you affiliate with a cause, with being Palestinian, with becoming Palestinian, you are affiliating with it based on your belief, based on intima, your affiliation. So being born a Palestinian does not necessarily mean that you are affiliated to that cause, to the liberation of Palestine. Blood doesn't really mean much, okay? We've seen, for example, a lot of Palestinians who simply don't care, all right? Whereas you've seen like others who are not even Arab, living somewhere in the West, who are truly becoming Palestinian. They are a work in progress. And I've met these people, I've talked to these people. I don't want to name anybody specifically because maybe they would not want to be named, but they have done for Palestine more than what other people who are Palestinian have done for Palestine. Even Edward Said, when he's writing in Out of Place in his memoir, he says that he wasn't always Palestinian. He was Palestinian in blood, but he wasn't Palestinian in mindset, in ideology. And the writing of the memoir records really his becoming Palestinian. So being born Palestinian doesn't mean that you affiliate with the cause of Palestine. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's a revolutionary becoming. And even a Palestinian needs to go through that self-construction process. But it also, you use the word unlearning, Zainab, and Edward Said uses that word at the end of the introduction to Orientalism, where he says that this work is a kind of unlearning. A lot of Zionist ideology has been absorbed into the mental psyche of so many, people and nations and governments. We really do need to go through this process of unlearning or deconstruction. But who's going to help, the world go through that? The world has begun. Gaza has done a lot. Of course, Gaza, we understand, is going through the most horrific kind of genocide. But a lot of people are waking up to the absolute brutality of what Israel is and represents. So I think becoming Palestinian is not something that we should limit to Palestinians per se. Becoming Palestinian is a human, anti-colonial, anti-oppressive concept. It's a revolutionary concept. It is a revolutionary becoming, okay? I'm not saying that we're there yet. We are all, trying, because everything, what we're doing here, it's a kind of learning in the positive sense of learning, okay? So becoming Palestinian is something moral, ethical, necessary, anti-colonial, just, etc. Put on the adjectives. And it is a process. In one of the poems by Mahmoud Darwish, he says something like, I forget which poem now, but he says something like, I'm sorry, but my identity is still under construction, okay? It hasn't been fully developed. That's why I think it is very important what you're doing, what Abdalla's doing, what I'm doing, what Wafa al-Khadra is doing, my very beautiful friend Wafa. What we do as intellectuals is very important. So it is we're going through this revolutionary process, and we're helping others go through it as well. Possibly the best summary for this, I mentioned it maybe at the very beginning of our talk, when I said the protests that you heard maybe last year or a few months ago, when people around the world say, in our thousands, in our millions, we are all Palestinians. What does that mean? That they are all human, they are all, in search for, justice to be, to come to this world. So becoming Palestinian then is revolutionary and ethical and necessary. And it's something that we must all practice and go through.
Thank you, Professor Tahrir. Moving to the concept of becoming Palestinian, Abdullah, and moving also, returning back to your 1 week visit to Jaffa. How that experience affected your construction of identity as a Palestinian? Because if you allow me just to mention this, when we met, you talked about that kind an act of mobility within a space, and you felt that that space, even that is vast, but still it is colonial. How can you to become, or how can decolonizing these colonial geographies and spaces contribute to our emancipation, liberation, and become really Palestinian? And I might here delete the word really, because it depends, as Professor Tahrir mentions as well. And I know that you have a lot to talk about this through your examples and your own experience as well.
Thank you, Zainab. I would second every single word that Dr. Tahrir said, because simply it was gonna be my answer when it comes to be how to be a Palestinian. It's an ongoing process. But I would like to add two other aspects. It's a confrontational act. You cannot be Palestinian without confronting language, knowledge, capitalism, every single tool and apparatus that tends to put you in under a label. Let's take, for example, referring to what you have mentioned and your question about mobility as an act of producing knowledge. My two daughters actually, their mother holds an Israeli passport, but holding that passport from her, they were named on that passport the different names other than my name. They were named according to their mother's name. Yani Yafa, my daughter was named Yafa Amara, my wife's family name, simply because Israel, they don't want me to have any kind of relationship to their quote unquote Israeli citizen. So I cannot, and I told Yafa, my daughter, that my perspective and my opinion about that. She needs to ask herself, who is Yafa Bayyari, my daughter, and Yafa Amara, who was the same human being, yet with different names. And the name is the first threshold in relationship with our identity. We can apply that on different parts of our identity, on our body, on our space, on our origins, on our how we curate, quote unquote, ourselves. So when we get back to mobility, let's get back to the example of the 6 political prisoners. They were helped by 3 societal categories, if I may say: women, Bedouins, and workers or daily workers اللي احنا بنسميهم عمال المياومي اللي بيشتغلوا بالمستوطنات, the people that used to work in settlements. Those three groups in Palestine, they are situated, according to Dr. Tahrir's opinion, on the periphery of the Israeli society. That's why they managed to help those six escapees. Okay, so applying that to my identity as a Palestinian, the more I am open to other peripheral identity inside me in a critical and confrontational and analytical way, the more I can build a sense of Palestinian hood, quote unquote, that can be an added value to being a Palestinian, to being a human being, to being an ethical human or moral human being in a way.
Thank you for sharing this very personal story, and it really requires a lot of courage to share this without condemnation.
I just realized it now, so
Well, this is the beauty of having such meetings, because we are not only like just asking questions and answering, but we are sharing. We are raising these thoughts out loud with a lot of audience. I don't want to push a lot of questions, because I told Professor Tahrir before this session that this session is not enough before we even started that. We need a lot of sessions together and teachings and reteachings and talkings in multiple spheres, not only online and virtual, but also in universities, institutions, as much as possible to connect with the streets, with the people, and listen, and also unite, although the word unity is very heavy and very thick to capture with all, as you said, like فرق تسد, because we need a lot of work to again be united under one thing. Allow me just to share this, since Professor Wafa is here. When we were discussing my dissertation and we were talking about what kind and what is the version of Palestine that we are talking about, we discovered that every one of us has their own version of Palestine. And this will get us directly to your book, Professor Tahrir, Imagining Palestine. And of course, Abdalla, to the word of imagining the geography of Palestine. For me, the only visit to Palestine was maybe when I was like months. I was fortunate to visit Jerusalem, Gaza, through photos. So I captured these photos, one beside the sea in Gaza and the other before Qubat al-Sakhra. And I really hold tight to that memory, although I don't remember it, because this is an act of post-memory that we're. So I would love to elaborate. You can jump from one point to point, exaggerate, do it personal or collective, talking about what is your version of Palestine, what kind of imagining between the metaphorical and the geographical. So we might start with Professor Tahrir, yes.
Well, wow, you surprised me. Yeah, although I wrote a whole book on it, but you surprised me with that question. You mentioned that you were months old when you visited Palestine. I was exactly 40 days old last time I visited Palestine. So I really don't know. I've never been there, but it lives in me. What my parents tell me about Palestine. We're from a village that's near Ramallah. It still exists, of course, but it's that, just the imagined what it looks like, the hills, the green hills, the olive trees. But for me, if I can say let's say, if I can live long enough to be able to return to a free Palestine, I think that for me would probably be the biggest, most unimaginable thing for me in life, to see the return of Palestine, to be able to return to Palestine and have my Palestine return to me, my imagined Palestine. Even as a small child, I always imagined it because it always lived within me. If you allow me, and it won't take too much time, please, Zainab, okay? Because it is a bit personal. When I was writing this book, Zainab, a lot of people very close to me passed away. My brother, who is very close to age as me, and my father. And there were other people who I admired very much, who also passed away when I was, or during the writing of this book. So I ended my book in a sort of collective prayer, if you allow me. I say the following, Zainab. During the writing of this book, many Palestinians in blood and hearts, because I was talking about filiation and affiliation, because you can be Palestinian in heart, as Mahmoud Darwish says. Let me repeat again. During the writing of this book, many Palestinians in blood and hearts, who are an integral part of the Palestinian narrative and revolution, which is still being written, passed from this life before fulfilling their dream of return. I name some of them here, and this line should make you think of William Butler Yeats's Easter 1916, where he names some of the martyrs of the Irish Revolution in the Easter Rising, if you remember. So I took the line from him. I name some of them here. To quote the Irish poet William Butler Yeats, to murmur name upon name as a mother names her child. My father, Khalil Ismail Hamdi, one of the founders of the Arab nationalist movement and the armed struggle for the liberation of Palestine. My brother, Hamdi Khalil Hamdi, the scientist who rooted his science in the very nature of Palestine. The two great Palestinian poets, Murid Barghouti, who sang of Palestine's repeated historical pain, and Izz al-Din al-Manasra, whose only wish was not to sleep in a grave in exile. The fearless professor and oppositional intellectual who spoke truth to power, Abdus-Sattar Qasim, and who wanted to take part in this conversation, but left us before he could, and Anis al-Naqash, the great Lebanese revolutionary, who was every bit a Palestinian, and who, when he knew of the imminence of his own death, wrote, "My life is done, but the Palestinian narrative has not ended. To all the martyrs of Palestine, we promise you to continue the struggle until there's a collective return to Palestine that would truly enable the Palestinian people to finally realize their genuine liberation." Tahrir. The end.
Yes, this is very emotionally. I'm driven by that, holding all the tears in the world. And sometimes I think about having this really collective condolence and crying session for everything. Peace be. May all their souls rest in peace. Your father, your brother, and all the intellectuals you mentioned who left us with an imprint in this world. Thank you very much, Professor, for sharing this. This book is not only, I cannot give this book to academia. It is really for all Palestinians who want to read, even though there are theorists and a lot of free citations here and there and references, there was always an escape from something that is really holding your breath with burden, and that will be released at the end of this book. Abdullah.
Abdalla, شو بدك؟
Abdullah, you're a Palestine, your version of Palestine, between the imagined, especially if you want to reflect on the destruction of the geography. Basically about you.
طيب. Okay. I think huge part of Palestine is built linguistically and culturally in a way that sometimes it might blind us to see things as it is. And I know this is a little bit pessimistic, but yet it's what's happening now in Palestine is part of how we must think about Palestine. Yes, it's a wonderful place. It's yet we need to be very realistic when it comes to realistic does not mean obeying power dynamics in political theory, modern political theory. It doesn't mean to end up as those criminals governing, I say it with full mouth, governing Palestinians in West Bank. But at least to be critical in a way that realizing what language sometimes blind us from seeing. I hope I managed to escape your question.
No, unfortunately, Abdullah. يعني not escape after يعني Dr. Tahrir killed the scene.
طبعا.
That it's
she
important.
I'm sorry for the personal aspects, but you know.
No, Professor.
Everything is personal when it comes to Palestine. Even when you think about architecture, it's personal. When it comes to chemistry or any kind of knowledge, it's personal in a way.
So Abdullah, you've not escaped that. And what kind of Palestine or imagined Palestine that you have and you want to have?
You know something, I would like to say, I would put it that way. When Palestine is liberated, I would feel free to go wherever in the world. But as long as it is occupied, I am very tied to this land, even in language or in real life.
Before I jump to my final question, I will open the Q&A from our audience who wants to comment, to drop a question for Professor Tahrir or Dr. Abdullah. We'd love to have your participation through voice. Of course, you can unmute, raise your hand and we'll allow you. Or you can... Yes, of course, طبعا. In the chat box. Professor Wafa, تفضلي.
Thank you, Dr. Zainab, and a big thank you also لغرفة الكتابة. Thank you, Professor Tahrir and Dr. Abdalla, for your generosity in your intuitive intellectual exposure and thought. And now, of course, with the Q&A, we'll have the interaction. And I agree with you, Dr. Zainab, that we need probably 4 or 5 sessions like this, just where we can give the opportunity to the audience to learn a lot from Professor Tahrir and Dr. Abdalla. The first comment is to Professor Tahrir. When I read the book, and now after hearing from you, I said I might be thinking about writing a paper on resistance epistemology, saying that Professor Tahrir was able to expand resistance literature into a new horizon of resistance epistemology. The fact that you were able to come up with an act of imagination to imagine Palestine, and the act of imagination you have in your book is an act to counter any attempt of erasure. And this is where I wanted to just try to define your conceptual framework. I felt that you created resistance epistemology through two things, and I would like you to reflect on that. The first one is the fact that you started off with the theoretical, conceptual, and then you came up with a private, personal narrative. And you not only you allowed it to intervene into your conceptual framework, but in fact, you allowed it to reclaim narrative. And this is where I see you, someone escaping any categorization of your work as elite, academic, highly theoretical paper. So to me, that was the private, the epistemic coming together through this kind of intervention and being able to be mutually constitutive is an act of becoming and an act of become. So thank you for that, and I would like you to reflect on it. The second one would go to Dr. Abdalla. You're also, you have some kind of resistance tools, even if you want to escape any kind of how can I say that, any kind of naming or labeling regarding the traditional way of resistance. But how I see it is the fact that your ability to move from the narrative of grand geography into indigenous geography is by itself another act of resistance and another act of becoming as a Palestinian and as someone holding this responsibility to imagine Palestine and to collect or to be part of the narrative about Palestine. The point that I want you to, share your reflection is related to your idea that language is exhausted or language is in crisis and narrative. I attempt to disagree with you, Abdalla, because in fact, what we are going through now is more of the foregrounding of diversified narrative, allowing a whole galaxy of narrative about and of Palestine. So I don't see it as some kind of language and narrative feeling what's happening. I see it as narrative expanding, but maybe there is, even with narrative, I'm gonna use what Professor Tahrir used earlier regarding Rice, where she said creative chaos. Now narrative is going through this creative chaos because it is in an act of become, and until it gets into becoming, it will create a whole galaxy of diversified narrative. And the narrative you have is like, you have this metaverse. If you visit the metaverse and you see what youth are trying to do regarding Palestine and working for Palestine, because they said Palestine does not anymore belong to Palestinians, it belongs to the whole world. This is our ethical responsibility regarding that. And in metaverse, you have like youth who are creating a concept of the return to Palestine that existed before 48. And they said, this is our way to create an erasure of the colonizer and the apartheid. So capture Jaffa, Safad, Al-Quds before 48. And they're creating that in the metaverse. Others would say, no, we have to create that in the midst of the occupation and colonization, because we don't want to betray the many stories of what's happening within and inside the apartheid. So this is just to give you, Abdalla, an idea about this kind of narrative that is so diversified and going from the verse into metaverse, from narrative into meta-narrative. And thank you.
Thank you, Professor Wafa. Professor Tahrir, please.
Yeah, first of all, I'd really like to thank Dr. Wafa for her presence with us and for her very thoughtful questions. Even while she was talking, I was thinking, so she made me think. But it's true, Dr. Wafa, when I was writing, when I first started writing the book, I didn't really know that I would include some, private bits here and there in the book. I thought it would just be like any other academic book. There's theory, there's analysis of literature. I would do some interviews, with some important people. For example, in the last chapter, I interviewed Ilham Pape, and I interviewed Layla Khaled and other well-known people. But as I was writing, I felt I'm not being true to myself. Because when I was like going through the poetry of Mahmoud Darwish or Barghouti, well, they were talking about me. They were talking about people like me. They were talking about my experience. What my dad was part of history, part of Palestinian history as well. So wherever I felt that here I needed to be personal, private, if you will, / national, I included it. And at the same time, because as I told you earlier, I had gone through, as I was writing the book, people very, very close to me had died. It was also very therapeutic for me to include my story. Then I found out my story, my personal story, the way we lived in exile. We were forced into exile. And I'm not talking about living in Jordan. We were forced to, from Jordan, let's say, to go to Chicago. And that's where we lived for some 15, 16 years in Chicago. The exile, the return from exile, the return to Jordan, and the hope of return to Palestine. So for me, it was just second nature that the private and the epistemic or academic should come together. There's no separating them. We as people don't think in separate categories. When we think cumulatively. So that's why when I was writing, and then I started thinking, well, how come the theories are not doing what I want them to do? How come the theories that I'm, even Frantz Fanon and Amilcar Cabral and Edward Said and everybody that I was using, they're great, but still there's more that I wanted to say. Post-colonialism for me was not enough. Ideas of hybrid, identity and mimicry for me was not enough. I even felt like I needed to make my own theory. And I sort of did. I came up with the term, the post-catastrophic writings. But the word post, the prefix post, I put it in parentheses because you can take it out and you can put it back in. It is catastrophic. We are post the catastrophic in terms of post the rupture, post the Nakba 1948, but we're not really post the catastrophic. That's why you can you can take it out and leave the catastrophic, because our catastrophe is ongoing, and now is the best example of that. So I just felt like even the theory that I was reading or that I knew very well was not enough to tell the kind of story that I wanted to tell. Even the idea of Marianne Hirsch's post-memory, it doesn't really fit into the Palestinian context. Again, why? Because it's not a memory that happened in the past and ended in the past. It is something that continues. So the memory that we're talking about is not post. We are living in it. We are living in the catastrophe, in a continuous ethnic cleansing. So this is what was happening, Dr. Wafat, to me. I was thinking and rethinking, focusing and refocusing, writing and rewriting. So it was like a configuration and reconfiguration until it felt right. So I guess you're right by calling it like my own becoming, because in this book, I myself, Tahrir, was becoming Palestinian. And I hope that I contributed to the area of resistance writing and resistance literature in that sense, that I introduced ideas that were not really on the ground before. I did not like generalize and then work to, try to apply theory to my work. No, I tried to theorize Palestine and see what I come up with. So it doesn't mean that I created all the theory. I took a bit from here and a bit from there and a bit from here and a bit from there and came up with my own. So it's like, and I called it post with parentheses, post-catastrophic writings. But it was very therapeutic, and it was very much, as you said, Dr. Wafa, it was very much a becoming for me, a revolutionary becoming. And it has become like a contribution to the resistance sphere. Thank you very much for asking that question, for allowing me to answer it.
Thank you, Professor.
And thank you for such a profound answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving from integrating the personal, the private, into the epistemic, to the language and the use of language and the vast narratives that Professor Wafa asked you, Abdalla.
Okay. If I want to answer directly in brief, I would say that we cannot experience the diversification of language unless we push it to its limits, to push it to almost to fail to describe. But before jumping to this direct answer, I would ask another question. How do we experience language? We experience language through state. Modern national state is a manifestation of communal shared language that regulates the relationship between people without overwhelming the individual aspect of it. This is supposed to be a secular or organizational modern national state. We experience language through epistemology. We experience language through city. Eventually, if we trace down the history of city, we would clearly see that city and modern novel are two manifestations that are very well organically connected to each other. So all those phenomena are linguistic in a way. So we experience language through those phenomena, and those phenomena are in a stage of problematization. They cannot the kind of knowledge that comes out of Gaza now is in Palestine as a colonial case is totally questioning the 100 years age of European Western knowledge, and the kind of narration, the kind of historicism, the kind of what kind of state do we need? Actually, if you ask me, I don't need a Palestinian state. I need liberation. If you want to make it a state, then do it by yourself. I wouldn't care anymore about this process. But yet, I'm thinking about all those are linguistic features that are are troubled by now in experiencing or reflecting what is really happening on the ground. Take for example, in 220, if I call it, if I recall it right, there was a حرائق, fires in غابات الكرمل in northern Palestine. We all know that those in northern Palestine, in Kermel area, there was some colonial agricultural activities that used plantation to cover the traces of Palestinian villages. So lots of us were cheering for this burning incidents simply because it will undo the colonial agricultural effect. My wife was crying because she has a memory there. Herself, her brothers, sisters, siblings, cousins, they have a kind of a memory that they spent there. While some people, both the two points of views, both are Palestinians, pro-Palestine. They are looking for liberation, yet there is no language of liberation in that case, or emancipatory language that really can tackle both situations, or both Palestinian indigenous rights in their memory and in their land, without being diversified in a way that really ethically addressing both situations. Another example, when you brought up the idea of metaverse, I have been in contact with مركز التخطيط البديل بفلسطين, في زخورة, another Madar Research Center. They all worked on reproducing the built environment before 1948, but that doesn't represent Palestine in a way. It represents the idea of recalling Palestine at a certain moment that I think the Palestinians are stuck in it in a way that we think about 1948, but we don't think about what was before that and how can we imagine it after that. It's the same as let's think about how is Palestine right now. Most of the political discourse and the resistant discourse does not care enough about how can we imagine. If we are talking about liberating and decolonizing imagination, we are not addressing that issue in a way that using a confrontational language. يعني ما بنقدر, we can think about it in a way that language is liberating. So yes, this is a meta narrative, but yet it's not as it's supposed to be a kind of liberation. We cannot do that unless we examine the real world as it is happening now in Gaza, happening now in Jenin, happening now. And we are now in this moment, we are facing the clash between different power dynamics in a way that political theory discourse cannot describe منظمة التحرير الفلسطينية بأنه هن فلسطينيين وتطور للحالة. They are not just an advancement of the political Palestinian political apparatus. It's part of the colonial apparatus that is colonizing Palestine. If we can't push our language to the level of, as you described it, diversification, we cannot liberate our mentality in a way. I hope I did answer your question, Dr. Ofer.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Abdalla. Thank you.
By the way, I'm not a doctor. يعني كلكم بتعرفوا I'm just a dentist.
A dentist. A dentist, but this is a doctor, and I always make it a point to say Professor Tahrir and Doctor, full Professor Dr.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Wafa, for your insights, comments, and for the guests' also collaboration. If there are any questions, Mu'nis, you wanted to participate in Arabic and you want to ask your question, please.
أهلا وسهلا بالعربي.
مساء الخير جميعا. بالبداية بحب أتشكركم على هذه الفرصة السعيدة، خاصة يعني لقاء الدكتور عبد الله وأيضا الدكتورة تحرير. هذه فرصة جميلة جدا. أيضا شكرا إلى غرفة الكتابة اللي دائما يعني بتتيح لنا فرصة يعني المشاركة والاستماع إلى يعني هذه المواضيع اللي نحن أكيد لا غنى عن الحديث عنها. في عندي سؤال حابب أوجهه، هو اسم فلسطين ممكن إنه نحن نختصره في مثلا يعني كتاب واحد، أو ممكن إنه نحن بحاجة إلى مجلدات أو مصنفات للحديث عن هذا الاسم. بمعنى في كثير من العلماء أو من الباحثين أو من الفلاسفة لما تحدثوا عن موضوع الوجودية، البعض منهم أخذ مثلا عدد لا بأس به من المصطلحات والكتب والمؤلفات لشرح ما هي الوجودية، لأنه طبعا هو مصطلح مهم للغاية. الآن هنا سؤالي بالمقارنة مع هذا الأمر، هل كلمة فلسطين بحاجة إلى يعني شرح مفصل، خاصة أنه هذا الاسم يرتبط بيعني عدد كبير من المعاني، يعني مش ممكن أنه نحصر اسم فلسطين ضمن شيء شيء واحد. البعض مثلا كان يوصف فلسطين بأنها هي الأرض وأنها السماء وأنها يعني الأم حتى. فهل من الممكن وصف فلسطين ضمن كتاب فقط، أم نحن بحاجة إلى مؤلفات، بحاجة إلى مصنفات، بحاجة إلى شرح كبير للغاية لاختصار هذا الاسم الذي فعلا يعبر عن شعوب يعني تنادي بالحرية والعدالة، وهي شعوب للأسف يعني هي ضحية ما يسمى بالجينوسايد اللي هو إبادة الجنس البشري. أنا برأيي أنه منذ بداية الحرب في غزة أنه العدو الصهيوني استخدم هذا المصطلح كنقطة أساسية بالحرب. هي كانت موجهة باستخدام هذا المصطلح، وهو كان يعني يرتكز على إبادة الجنس البشري بلا أي شك. يعني الكل يعي تماما بأنه هذا المصطلح ظهر منذ يعني المغول هولاكو وبيغو، ويعني وانتقل إلى الكيان الصهيوني لاحقا. فأعتقد أن يعني فلسطين هو اسم، هل يمكن تلخيصه في كتاب واحد، أم هو بحاجة إلى يعني عدد من الكلمات تتجاوز من البحور الأعماق وما دون ذلك. شكرا للدكتورة زينب القيسي مجددا، وأنا سعيد للغاية لأنه أتحتي لي الفرصة للمشاركة.
شكرا لك مؤنس. يعني رح أجاوب بالعربي هون، لأنه الدكتورة تحرير والدكتور عبد الله هن تحدثوا عن يعني المعنى الخاص بهم بفلسطين، واكيد رح اترك لهم انا يعني ممكن تعملوا انسايتس او اجابات. بس قبل ما ننتقل، بس رح اخذ انا مداخله اخيره، يعني وهي مداخله عزيزه، لانه اللي عم بتشارك معنا من غزه اسماء دوايمه. تفضلي اسماء. احنا دائما بنواجه مشكله، بيبدأ انه اسماء معنا. اسماء عم تقدري تفتحي المايك؟
Yes, hi.
هو الصوت يلا عم نسمعك.
Is it clear?
Yes, please.
Okay, so first of all, I want to thank you, Zainab, and Dr. Tahrir and Ustad Abdullah for this session. It was really interesting, but I'm so sorry I don't hear the whole session because my internet connection is not that good. But I want to clarify a little bit points like about what I have heard from this whole session. First of all, I want to say about my comments that I say it's almost 500 days and even more. Like I'd say it in the language of seconds because I feel that Israel is trying to like count us, like count this genocide in terms of years, not days. So I think we have to focus on days at least, not just to say that it's 1 year. This is the first thing I want to say. The second thing is what Dr. Abdullah said. You said that you can't find a way to describe what's happening here in Gaza to a little child. Like, I'm asking this because I hear a lot of people like who prevent their children from watching the news and hearing about how children like almost in the same age are dying here. I know some people like say it's violence or something, but it's the reality at the same time. So isn't it a way like to romanticize the reality to prevent the children from hearing and understanding the whole situation? And like, what do you think about that? The second thing is Dr. Tahrir, you have mentioned someone who say that it's not a genocide since there is about like 2.5 million people still in Gaza. First of all, I'm really speechless, seriously, like the whole world is waiting for us to die. But I strongly believe that it's a matter of social effect. Okay, it's how social media platforms helps to define Palestine to the whole world, but in the same time, how murders are turning to social trends of like multiple people using their abilities to make a video or something. Like, don't you think that it's something that make people have the relieving sensation? These published stories and sharing their images, whatever, is like a temporary anesthesia. I don't know. I really believe that writing is a way also to resist, and it's my way to resist, but I think it's not enough, as you said also. What I want to say also, Dr. Tahrir, that you say that how you define your part as not to be defeated. I don't totally agree with that because IF is killing us even physically or mentally here. For me, I don't been killed so far physically, but mentally they are killing us slowly. Like for me, losing a friend is a defeat. Losing a home, being displaced is also a defeat. One point that I like to that you mentioned, Dr. Tahrir, is like more is essential in Palestine, and that's also what I believe that, and that's what I'm doing right now is just memorizing everything that I'm watching, I'm living, and everything. I want to end this speech, I don't know, a comment, was something I have heard that Symmetry is the richest place in the world because people like had died having their ideas and loves in their souls. And I believe that 100% Gaza is the richest area in the world because we are literally dying while yearning to live. Thank you.
Thank you, Asma. Asma is an emerging writer and poet from Gaza. She always speaks up her mind. And thank you very much for this truthful insights, because we want to connect Professor Tahrir and then Dr. Abdalla.
Okay, very quickly about the person who asked about Palestine, if it can be all, written in one book. Of course not. That would go against everything that I've been saying tonight. I mean, we're talking about inclusivity, which means that everybody's experience is important. My experience may be radically different from Abdalla's and Zainab's and Wafa's and Asma's, okay? So I may want to concentrate on Palestine in one sphere. Somebody else may want to concentrate on Palestine in a different sphere. Doesn't mean that my field is more important than yours. I contribute. So I think we need many books. We need volumes. We need endless work on Palestine, even after Palestine is, inshallah, liberated, because it is a lesson that humanity must learn from and must never forget. So can it be summarized in just one volume? Absolutely not. Palestine is a school. It is our teacher. It is our guide. But there are vast fields that need to be still studied that have not yet been studied. Even the idea of Palestinian sumud, as the young lady Asma from Gaza was talking about. And this would allow me to slide into Asma's question as well, if I understood it correctly, Asma. By the way, I think it is very important for us, yes, to make our children and to make our young people and old people and all of us see what is happening in Gaza. You are experiencing it, okay? So who am I to turn away and say, oh, this is too difficult. Oh, this is too painful. Yes, it's painful, but you must be exposed to it, because that's what this ugly world has allowed to happen and is still happening. So, and then to slide in to your comment on defeat and defeatism. What you talked about, Asma, is very painful loss. And you have every right in this world to feel this very painful loss of your friends, your family members, the massive, unimaginable destruction that I don't think I have ever seen or witnessed anything like this in my lifetime. So to feel loss and to be very, emotionally and psychologically impacted by that loss is exactly how you should feel, how I should feel. Just even trying to imagine the kind of loss that you're going through now, the horror that you're going through. But should that leave us, or should that make us feel defeated? To be defeated and to feel defeated and to believe in this concept of defeatism is to surrender. To surrender to what? Is to surrender to their version of brutality, of horror. Because at the end of it, Asma, I'm not making it up. Piers Morgan said it's not a Holocaust because not all 2 million plus people have been killed yet. That kind of ugliness is nothing you want to surrender to, okay? So to be defeated and to believe, to go along with this concept of defeatism is to believe in that very ugly way of thinking, which must be defeated. I would rather die fighting, okay, than live in that kind of defeat, okay? Defeat and defeatism means to accept their version of their horrible world, which we as people, as human beings, as Arabs, as Palestinians, can never and should never accept. That would be betraying our very humanity. To accept that, to surrender to it, to feel defeated, we would betray who we are as human beings, our own humanity. So please, I know it's hard for you, and I can't imagine how hard it is for you, but please don't reach that point where, you know, you say, I'm defeated. You have experienced horrible loss. And I can't even begin to imagine, but we are with you. The world is with you. Everybody who calls himself or herself a human being must be Palestinian, must be from Gaza now.
Thank you, Professor Tahrir. Goes to you, Professor Dr. Abdalla.
طيب thank you again دكتور تحرير. مؤنس إجابة سريعة عطفا على اللي حكته دكتورة تحرير. لا فيش كتاب واحد ممكن يوصف فلسطين. أسماء أوكي قلبي معك مبدئيا. But I would with full mouth مثل ما بنحكي بالعربي بالفم الملآن nothing romantic about what's happening in Gaza. We need this this meaning apparatus, هاي الأداة المعنوية. We need it just to give us hope to continue on struggling, to continue on resisting, to continue on defending our right in the meaning. حقنا في إنتاج معنى. I have two daughters. Both of them are exposed to what's happening in Gaza. We keep saying that. Gaza and what's happening generally in Palestine is actually, it is the only threshold of meaning that we need to judge the whole world and all our existence according to. يعني ما فيش معنى ما إلوش علاقة بغزة هلا. أنا يعني حتى الأشياء even things that appears to be not related directly to colonial cause, it must be pushed on to be. Even I do reflect a lot nowadays about being a father. What does it mean to be a father? What does it mean to write? What does it mean to eat? What does it mean to be a friend, a brother, a father, a mother, or whatsoever? Actually, we need to make what's happening in Palestine our reference point to understand the whole what's going on in our world. Which brings me to the other point. We as Palestinians, the moment we are liberated and freed from colonization, we will face lots of things that are much worse than colonization. Simply, we need to get back to reflect upon what has happened inside of us, the amount of killing, of ugliness, facing someone like, here's Morgan as someone that has the ugly audacity to judge us, this will eventually it will leave a mark from within. Building a culture of resistance is being able to study, learn from such experiences and marks that are left within. وقلبي معك كمان مرة أسمع.
Thank you, Dr. Abdalla. And I know that with the leisure of time that we exceeded our time. Thanks, طبعا, for the guests who bear with us. But as I told you from the beginning, this is a very wide topic, and I think we all need the space to talk and share. So before we end, I would love to hear your final remarks in our today's session on the whole topic, on everything, or final words before we come to a conclusion and closure.
Final words. Because I really don't have anything prepared in terms of final words. So the best thing to do when you have nothing left to say is to read something. It's short, don't worry. This is from a poem from Mahmoud Darwish that was published in 2013. 2013. So we're talking about 11, 12 years ago. It's called Silence for Gaza. This is just the last part of the poem. He says, enemies might triumph over Gaza. The storming sea might triumph over an island. They might chop down all its trees. They might break its bones. They might implant tanks on the insides of its children and women. They might throw it into the sea, sand, or blood. But it will not repeat lies and say yes to invaders. It will continue to explode. It is neither death nor suicide. It is Gaza's way of declaring that it deserves to live. It will continue to explode. So I guess that's what I wanted to say from the very beginning. And it's like another, and Asma asked it, she said, sometimes I feel defeated. They can break your bones, they can spill your blood, they can throw you into the sea, but they cannot and they will not defeat you. You are the strongest and greatest people on earth. And this is something that I want to leave with. And I'm proud. Maybe we can say that. Now let's give ourselves the benefit of saying, I'm proud actually to say that I'm Palestinian, because I think Palestine over the last 15, 16, 17 months at least, to limit it, has taught the world a great lesson, and that is the lesson of humanity and sumud.
Thank you, Professor Tahrir. Thank you. Dr. Abdalla?
Thank you, Zainab. Thank you, Dr. Tahrir. Thank you for each and every one of you. Thank you, Asma or Rita. I have nothing further to add. I have two quotes jumping into my mind all the time. One of them is for the Lebanese intellectual and theoretician who Mahdi عامل. مهدي كان دائما بيحكي لم تهزم ما دمت مقاوما. You are not defeated as long as you are still resisting. فبرأيي I see resistance is victory in a way. it doesn't mean that you need to be victorious in order to be not defeated. As long as you are resistant, you are victorious. And this comes with a huge price. We all know that. The second quote is the famous quote of باسل الأعرج, who used to be a friend of mine. باسل دائما بيحكي ما بحب, I don't like to translate it in Arabic and English, but it's يعني I deprive it part of its agency if I translate it. المقولة بتحكي المقاومة جدوى مستمرة. وكمان مرة thank you all, thank you Dr. Tahrir, thank you Zainab.
Thank you, Zainab. Thank you, everyone. Thank you all. It was
Just
a joy.
yes, let me end this, and I would love to also end our session today with our quote from Fadi Jude's poem. He's a Palestinian American acclaimed author who lost over 60 members of his family in this last genocide on Gaza, and he says, good morning Gaza, get up and rise, get up and recite the verse of return to a land we have carried like a tattoo on the hand. Thank you for accepting our invitation في غرفة الكتاب, كتابة room, in our writing spaces that we always hold in Arabic, but today we held in English. Palestine will be liberated, this is for sure, whether in our time or in the future, in our children's time, who should know the truth about it. Maybe today we tackle and scratch the surface of writing about the Palestinian cause, القضية الفلسطينية, but with sumud, with resistance, with all the power we have in ourselves, we will always emerge in different shapes, in different numbers, and until we reach the type of liberation, tahrir, we want in ourselves, and we share with it, whether in poems, writing, we will still rise as always. Thank you very much. This is our last writing session in the Kitaba room for this year, but I invite you all to attend our أمسية الشعرية, أمسيات مزاج, on Monday, because it will be a special أمسية شعرية. We are hosting poets from قطاع غزة. They will be with us. We will be with more than 8 poets who will recite the poems of war with us. So please come and attend. This session will be uploaded into YouTube along with links to Professor Tahrir's book, so you can get it, and also links to her articles and Dr. Abdalla's also articles on Al-Mudan wal-Khara'ib wal-Hara'ik and architecture, so you can take a look, closer look on their work. Thank you very much, and good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.